All right, friends. Well, welcome to the fourth and the last C4 JEDI speaker series. Again, my name is August Ball. I am the founder and CEO of Cream City Conservation. I'm so excited that you all have been able to join us today for this presentation on why your organization lacks diversity and what to do about it. So this session will be recorded for any of your colleagues who don't make it or can't make it live, or if you'd like to review. If you would like any of the recordings of our past C4 JEDI speaker series, I'm happy to email out links to that as well. That will go out later this week, along with the recording of today. Wonderful. I'm seeing a lot of folks from Wisconsin, Colorado, Illinois. Welcome, welcome. All right, friends, we're going to jump right into it. So, first, I want to just remind you all how proud I am that we are Wisconsin's first Black-owned certified B Corp. This means that we have met the highest standards for social and environmental impact while also maintaining profitability. This year, we were also designated as one of the organizations globally that is best for the world in our workforce practices in the category of our company size. So if you're not quite familiar with B Corps, essentially we are a social enterprise, which means that we solve a social, our product essentially solves a social problem, or we use the profits from that work to help solve a social problem. So there's a deep connection between our social enterprise, our business component, as well as the social impact that we have. So what this means for us is that we lead this work with a mission of inspiring people to inspire people to live socially and environmentally just. We're very clear on how open-ended that process can be because we're not married to exactly how we're going to get there, but we are married to the North Star of wanting this as an outcome. And for us, this means that we do this work through consulting with organizations just like yours, giving public presentations, keynotes, as well as our program offerings to help organizations cultivate the culture necessary to promote an organization that is just and inclusive so that they can thrive and promote innovation and solve some of the key issues that have brought the organization into fold to begin with. So we believe in creating more leaders rather than more followers. One of the ways that we engage in the social impact component is through our conservation work on the land. So profits from our consulting work go to support young adults in Milwaukee County in connecting them to careers in the conservation and water space. We are so fortunate to work with our local county parks department, the U.S. Forest Service, the DNR, as well as some local land trusts around the area. These young adults get to shadow other professionals in the field, as well as gain critical certifications and experience that will make them valuable to the industry. We also work in the space of water. And for us, this means connecting young adults to careers in water reclamation, in water technician careers, connecting them to green infrastructure projects, as well as knowledge around climate science and climate change. This is a really great partnership that we are proud to be in, I believe going into our fourth year, if I'm not mistaken, with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District. These young adults get prepared for careers, in green infrastructure, and also learn how to be ambassadors of connecting their communities, their friends and family, to becoming more sustainable residents and denizens of Milwaukee County. We also work in the space of food sovereignty, and we do this again in partnership with the local Boys and Girls Club, the UW Milwaukee's Office of Sustainability. In the past, these young adults have grown their own produce from seed. We've partnered with Milwaukee Public Schools on these projects. Young adults get to learn about soil science, food sovereignty, nutrition, and entrepreneurship. In the past, prior to the pandemic, the young adults were able to work with local chefs and cultivate salads that were then sold at local brew games on Sundays. Currently, though, when we engage in this project, the young adults choose instead to donate the produce to local food banks and charities. And lastly, but probably even more importantly, we work in the space of policy. We do this by connecting young adults to their representatives and engaging them in taking ownership and action around ensuring that our elected officials do what they say they're going to do to protect our planet for generations to come. They learn about organizing. They learn about, again, public speaking and how policies come to be in our society. So again, I feel very honored to be able to take the proceeds from the work that we do with organizations just like yours and support efforts in various ways in driving change in our community. So I'd like to start us off with one of the first reasons that organizations struggle a little bit when it comes to creating an organization that is diverse and dynamic. But before I do that, I'd actually like to launch a quick poll just to see how familiar each of you are with our organization. So if you could take a moment just to answer the quick question in front of you, that would be awesome, just so I know who's in the room. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, keep them coming. We almost got 100%. All right, we're going to stop there. So just so you can all see the results, who's in the room. So the majority of you are fairly familiar with me, but there are some who are not. So I always like to take that moment to share kind of the why behind this work. We are a certified B Corp. We are not a 501c3. And so this allows us to utilize our own proceeds to do really impactful work without being another entity that is vying for fairly rare donation dollars. We want that to go to our clients who are also doing amazing work. Okay, so what are some of the key reasons that organizations fail at building a dynamic and diverse team? Well, for one, there's a failure oftentimes to recognize and to admit that essentially having a diverse workforce is good for business. What this means is that leaders can often fail at communicating how their workforce is linked to their company's success in terms of meeting its mission. Also, leaders sometimes themselves don't realize and recognize how critical having a diverse and dynamic workforce is to the success of their company. I can't tell you how many times I have heard individuals note that they were a conservation corps or they were a solar company, not a social justice organization, and they don't see the connection between having a workforce that is representative of the general population. And so it's my job to help communicate that so that leaders understand. Again, if this work is not led directly from leadership and driven from leadership, I have yet to see it succeed. So this is one of those areas that we are uncompromising around. The next is that oftentimes leaders have failed to establish trust with their existing team members. And this can mean that there's been a failure to make amends for any past harm. And now that staff are distrustful of intentions, they oftentimes don't participate in any efforts to promote diversity and equity within the organization. There can also be a fear of pushback and criticism to point out where the organization could be doing better. The next common problem I see with organizations is thinking that one person or a department is responsible for your entire organization's workforce diversity. How this can manifest is organizations can hire a chief diversity officer or a chief people officer. They can initiate a D&I committee or have their organizations take a one-off diversity workshop and think that that alone is going to solve all of their problems. Or worse yet, they think that they're done by simply doing those things. When it comes to D&I committees, especially, another key area of opportunity is making sure that that committee, that group actually has some teeth. If that entity doesn't have the authority to drive change in the organization, to hold the organization accountable to what it's committing to, it all becomes just lip service. And the next is that there's no benchmark that's been set. There's no intersectional analysis of how various individuals are experiencing the organizational culture. Or if tracking is happening, we're measuring the wrong stuff. So often our companies will track simply the existence of various people and their identities, but not evaluate that existence intersectionally to see if anyone or any particular group's identity is impacting how they're experiencing the organization. Next, we haven't cleaned house. What I mean by this is that the organization, the company itself, hasn't ridden itself of its own unconscious biases as it relates to recruiting and hiring. It doesn't have an actual retention plan for its staff, let alone for its staff with marginalized identities. And leadership hasn't addressed the general fear of change head on. There can be a fear of we don't want to upset anyone. The reality is this work is messy, it is nonlinear, and if we're going to promote change, it's going to be a bit of a rocky road. The goal isn't to do this work without any conflict. In fact, it can't be done without conflict. Naturally, we are going to push back on change, even when we think that change will eventually be positive. But the key here is for leadership to show consistency, for leadership to create space for staff members to bring forward constructive dissent, to let them in on why staff think efforts might fail or where they have distrust. If we don't have an environment that welcomes that feedback, we never get the opportunity to expand on our solutions. So my intention is to help organizations have a clear framework for equity and inclusion within their institutions. And we look at this from these key phases, looking at how you are attracting your talent, looking at how you are selecting your talent, how you are developing that talent once they're within your four walls, virtually or physically, and how you will retain them. Now, this can apply for staff, this can apply for volunteers, board members, etc. Again, if we are not intentional about each of these four steps, we end up falling short of our goals. Now, I want to take a moment to check in with you all to see, did any of that resonate with you? So I'm going to launch one more poll. If you could all take a moment just to answer, does this sound like your organization? Awesome. Keep that coming in. Almost done. I'll make sure we give everyone a chance to chat in their answers. All right, lovely. So here are our results, friends. So it looks like the majority of you are saying, yeah, that definitely sounds like us. And some of you have said, I think our problem is a little different. We're going to definitely open the floor up for you to share with us now. So friends, so for those of you who said, you know what, somewhat, but I think our problem is different, please raise your hand. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the different issues that's coming up for your organization? Don't be shy. Or if you would like, you can put it into the chat too. That's also okay. All right. Well, while we're waiting for a volunteer, I'm going to move forward with, again, why most organizations, oh, we've got one. Okay, Manuela, please go right ahead.
Hi, thanks. So my organization, so I think the problem we've had is that when conflict does arise, leadership is unable to actually manage the conflict in any way, let alone in a like comprehensive and holistic way that allows the conflict to potentially either resolve itself or just work through the conflict. That has been kind of like the main slightly different problem or like adjacent problem to what you kind of just shared.
Yeah. So there isn't a process for making amends.
They have tried, but it has been unsuccessful.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Manuela.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the opportunity, right? To test out like the pudding, if you will. uh, right? So organizations will have the best intentions and will make these bold commitments, right? For example, with diversity statements, with setting up JEDI committees. But then when someone says, "Hey, harm is happening to me," or here's a conflict that we have, all of a sudden we're running around like chickens with our heads cut off because we actually don't have a plan for how to navigate those situations. And then we end up failing our organizations, failing our team members by falling short of addressing those things. So the key rather that I often recommend to our clients is don't just come forward and tell us what you value. Tell us how you will embody that value. Tell us how you will protect folks, especially folks of marginalized identities, when they bring forward concerns around how you may be falling short of your commitments, right? And this takes time, friends, right? And if we are afraid of doing this work imperfectly, then that leaves us essentially frozen, and we want to be taking action. Again, we want to be taking thoughtful action, but action nonetheless. So here are some of the reasons that we get stuck. We don't know where to start, right? We are so paralyzed by our need for perfection often that we end up doing nothing. It's kind of like an overwhelm around all the decisions that we have to make, all the considerations. The next is that we've got some people who are bought in and understand the importance of shifting the way that we do business. And then we have some who feel that, we're just fine just the way we are, or, we don't have shared language. So we want to get everyone on the same page. The next is that we don't actually have an implementable plan to take what we've learned and apply it to our organizations. All right. So, oh yeah, thank you for the comment there, Diane. Something to consider. All right. So there's two ways that organizations work with us. One is privately, one-on-one, and another is through our cohort program. Our cohort program is intended specifically for environmental and community-based organizations who have again, a mission as well that is focused on supporting community, supporting a goal that is going to impact the majority of people, for example. And the value of engaging rather in this work via the cohort is that you get to be in community with other organizations who are also mission minded. So I want to give you a little bit of information around that. So we offer our cohort process twice a year in the spring and in the fall. This is primarily because a lot of our organizations that are community based are really busy over the summer, as are we. But also during the summer is a time that we like to reset. Some of you may want to take some personal time off, and we don't want to be intruding on that too much. So organizations from all over the US, including Canada, and sometimes some other surrounding countries like Central America, will participate in the cohort process. We typically cap it at about six organizations, unless we have some much smaller organizations that will participate. And this allows for each organization to bring forward up to 100 participants in the process, in our learning process. But even if your organization has more than 100 staff, everyone participates in the culture assessment. So each organization has a private culture assessment that they launch that helps them evaluate and get a benchmark of where they're thriving in terms of their organizational culture and where they might be struggling. The reality, friends, is that for North America, at least, most of our common workforce practices are built around middle class white norms. And if we're ever going to create inclusive cultures, we have to check in on who are these policies and practices benefiting? Who are they creating undue burdens for? Do we really need to approach this way, or is there another way that we can approach this work? We stress that these culture assessments are private because only your organization sees the results from your assessment. Unless you want to personally share that with others in the cohort, again, only you receive that information. From there, we move into doing a series of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion workshops. This is to help us build some shared language. A few years ago, during the uprisings in response to the murder of George Floyd, I noticed quite a few well meaning individuals in various industries having some very contentious conversations about what our place is within this work as organizations. And what I noticed from these conversations is that much of the contention had actually stemmed from us not having shared language. For example, to this day, it is extremely common for groups of people to use terms like racial prejudice and racism interchangeably when they are not the same thing. And so, if we can't even have the starting place of having shared language, we can't even begin to have dialogue on what to do differently if we're in contentious conversations about completely different things. The next concern is that the majority of our organizations simply don't have the diversity to give. And so, what this means is even if an organization wanted to provide a support system for their staff based on identity, if you only have one Hmong staff, who has a disability and one LGBTQIA, white man, it's going to be a bit challenging, right, to offer some support and community for them. It's important to recognize that our identity is not neutral. It's not formed in a neutral environment. And in order for us to be better equipped to work across, in cross collaborative environments, we have to also have spaces where we are safer, I should say, to explore our own identities and how that impacts how we show up in the world of work. And so being a part of the cohort allows for participants to have access to sovereignly led affinity spaces. We also encourage organizations to host their own internal reflection sessions so that they can dialogue around each of the learning opportunities that take place throughout our time together and discuss how those components might be showing up in your workplace, what that might mean for your organization, and what you could be doing differently. And then lastly, we conclude our work together by co-creating a roadmap for each of your organizations. So based on your assessment, your newfound shared language, and your desired future state, each organization leaves the cohort with a 12-month plan of what they're going to implement over the next 12 months. My team and I work together to make sure that you're supported all steps of the way. So I want to highlight here some of our colleagues. Catherine Kevin, who runs supports our White Caucus space, as well as our biweekly brain trust calls, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Tyanda Mack to the right-hand side of the triad here helps support rather our People of the Global Majority organization as needed, as well as serves as our conflict mitigation specialist. Because again, as I mentioned, this work is messy. It brings up a lot of concerns, and we don't always have the language or the process to resolve and or manage that conflict. And I want to be clear, not all conflict can be resolved, but all conflict can be managed. And so we don't want a world where there's never any conflict, right? This means typically that there's some lockstep, that there's some fear in offering constructive dissent. We want to invite those things. We want to invite that feedback. We want someone to tell us where this plan may break so that we can meet that head on and have a stronger, more innovative approach. But so often organizations push back on that constructive dissent and don't create an environment where it's safe for employees, volunteers, board members, staff to bring that forward. Down below, you will meet Karina Gonzalez and Jesh Alberto, again, who support our breakouts during the JEDI sessions, as well as helping to co-create your roadmap. So again, here's our process. We start out by assessing your organizational culture. Where are you thriving? Where are you experiencing some challenges? We move forward into our foundational and advanced level workshops. This means that every Tuesday, starting in January, for 2.5 hours, your organization is participating in live workshops. Now we know that life happens. Sometimes you're on deadline, you have a family emergency. These workshops are recorded and available throughout the program, but we do encourage individuals to watch the recordings if they can't make it live so that they can be prepared for their internal weekly reflection sessions around that topic. Each of the workshops do build upon one another. And before we leave today, I will give everyone access to what those workshops are. And again, phase 3 allows us to draft a strategy for your organization. And you will leave with 2 parts, an internal work plan that is fluid, that can be adjusted as different priorities and concerns come up, and a roadmap that is public facing that you can share with funders, with potential employees, with board members, with volunteers, and community members. So when we say assessing your organizational culture, what do we mean by this? Well, for one, we want to bring some clarifying data to a complex topic. Again, as I mentioned, some organizations have the pushback of, I don't think we're really experiencing a problem, to, well, I know we have a problem, but I don't think it's that bad, right? So here's some examples of this. On the left-hand side, you can see an organization is tracking simply the representation that they have in their organization. This is essentially the bright, shiny faces that go on your pamphlets, right? The pictures maybe of your participants. But I want us to take a really honest look at where that representation is taking place in your organization. Is your leadership reflective of your goals around diversity and representation? How is that power distributed across identity? And how are people experiencing your organization, right? On the right-hand side, you can see the differential between the intersectional analysis of individuals' identity. So again, one of the ways to address this, whether you work with C4 or not, is to get a baseline of your organizational culture. And this should offer you an accurate description of what's happening and assess those results against your desired future state. The next is to identify areas for improvement. You want to know, where are you doing things well and where are you not doing them so well? Next, you want to establish some shared language. So often when we have a problem, there's a natural desire, especially for folks in our industry that is community focused, to dive right in and try to solve for the problem, right? We can over intellectualize these problems. We can also focus very heavily on systems. Not that that is wrong, but friends, we have to remember that people create systems. And so if we as individuals aren't setting up guardrails to protect and mitigate against our own very natural unconscious biases and consistently setting up stop guards to protect against that, we're going to continue producing the same results we've always had. So we want to have a shared vision for your organization's values. This means there should never be a question of what your organization values. There should never be a disconnect between what we say we value and what we do, where we invest our time, our money, as well as having a plan to make sure that as your organization grows and evolves, that you don't lose that momentum, that you don't lose those shared values and language based on staff changes, right? So often organizations rely on their culture being developed through the personalities of those who hold power. And sometimes that's a positive thing, but sometimes it can be a negative thing when that individual leaves and they take that culture with them because they were the only ones driving it. Here are some of the factors we recommend that you evaluate. Sense of belonging. The Harvard Business Review has numerous articles and studies that show that a strong sense of belonging is one of the key contributors to retention as well as innovation. The next thing we want to focus on is fairness. How are people feeling about their sense of fairness around opportunities, around feedback, around opportunities for growth? Decision making. Do people feel heard? Are they included in decisions that are going to impact their work? Or is it more top down? Diversity as a whole. Do people feel that that is something that your organization values? Do people feel that you have a plan for how you're going to ensure growth over time? The United States specifically is changing significantly, friends, and our demographics right now are going to be different in the next 10 to 20 years. And if we are waiting until the wolf is at the door to do work that shows that what we value in terms of a dynamic and a diverse workplace, we're going to find ourselves becoming obsolete. The next is voice. Are we accounting for neurodiversity? Are we accounting for various components of identity, or are we zeroing in on just one facet and hoping that that will be a one size fits all approach? Are we leveraging the connection that our staff have to mission? Are we ensuring that staff feel that their skills and their talents are utilized? Some of the ways that we do this is by evaluating identity based on heat maps. So, for example, in our studies, one of the things we find is that for organizations that have multilingual or bilingual staff, even though their language, their native language may be English, we're finding that there are deep disparities in staff who are expected to use their additional language skills without any additional compensation. Just as an example for one. We also note that specifically in the nonprofit field, there is a disgruntlement around wages, but yet majority of the folks who are who voice the perspective that well, in order to work for a do-gooding organization, one must sacrifice their financial stability. Oftentimes tend to come from households of higher socioeconomic background. So again, right, highlighting specifically some differentials between what we say we value and who we are versus who we actually are. So we want to address some of those unconscious biases that, oh, people don't want to work for us because we pay low wages. Yeah, that could be part of it, or because they don't care, they're not as invested in the suffering, right, of our organizations. I have often said this, and I will say it again. If we cannot afford to pay people a living wage, we can't afford to be in business. Period. There's nothing else to that statement. So now each of your organizations are unique. And this means that we'll want to have some custom demographics in your assessment. So we'll want to look at rank and role, location, if your organization is spread out amongst different regions, neighborhoods, zip codes, states. We also look into job level, multilingual skills, even income. For organizations that are interested in doing a equity audit or a pay audit, you will get some answers in our assessment looking at income as it relates to gender, race, tenure, and position in the organization. I want to give you all an example of what this looks like on the back end. So here you'll see, as an example, one of the heat maps, the demographics that we're looking at are teams. So we can see here that the sales team not having a great time, right? They are struggling a little bit. And if I were to open some of the factors like engagement, company confidence, enablement, there will be various questions connected to that factor. And so we can see how folks based on those particular heat maps responded. Now, again, we also want to know where we are thriving. So when we look at this from the back end of our platform, we can see that the events team is actually having a fairly good time. They're fairly optimistic about these various factors. So we want to know what's happening here that is promoting that kind of experience, that differential. Let's go a bit deeper. Here's how this looks when we look at the data intersectionally. So on the left-hand side, we can see that when we compare the experiences of women of color to white women, to men of color to white men, we can see who is experiencing the most marginalization in the organization. And then we can go in and do something about that. On the right-hand side, we are looking at gender and disability, right? And from this graph, we can see that men who don't have a disability are actually scoring the highest in terms of overall engagement with the organization, whereas women with a disability are scoring the lowest. Okay? We don't have a one-size-fits-all approach, but if we can solve for those who are experiencing the most marginalization, we have a better opportunity at lifting the organizational culture as a whole. So how then do we protect against outing anyone based on their identity, right? Well, we keep a minimum sample size of 3. Now, if your organization has less than, say, 25 people, we might want to adjust how we approach your assessment. Again, this approach that I'm suggesting is great for organizations that have, up to 100 to 400 people. But the average size of the organizations that participate in the cohort are anywhere from 25 to 45 people. So here's an example of how we protect identity. So looking at how individuals are affected in decisions that affect their work, included rather, in decisions that affect their work, we can see based on gender that we have some folks who identify as non-binary, but because we didn't meet that minimum sample size, they're not going to be able to, well, we won't be able to see their reports independently, right? Like we do the other groups. Their responses, however, will be included in the overall component. So the next is that we want to be able to dig into the data a bit further through comments. So giving your staff members an opportunity to provide additional commentary on how they answered your assessment questions is also going to give you some additional data that can be really valuable. Within our platform, you can see how how individuals rather are responding to each of the questions. Again, I want to showcase here how comments are connected to the questions themselves, not to the individual person or even their own identity. We can, however, choose one factor to discern comments from. So for example, if you wanted to have all of the comments that come from one department separated out, we could do that. But again, only one demographic can be chosen. I'd love to know here, how many of you are currently assessing your organizational culture, at least annually? If you could put that into the chat. Okay. No. Okay, some says yes. Yeah. Let me know who is currently assessing their organizational culture and intersectionally, at least annually. Okay. See one yes so far, mostly no so far. Okay. Kind of. Okay. Thank you. So what I also love about this particular platform is that it allows us to see your organizational staff members or participants' responses based on topic, right? So at a glance, we can see, okay, the majority of our staff have responded gave comments that were positive towards their manager, their learning and development and collaboration. But boy, are we not super happy about our salary, about our systems and resources, about sense of autonomy and recognition. Okay? Maybe there's even some inconsistency around who's getting feedback and how often folks are getting that feedback. I'm going to chat in this link here to our FAQ with regards to the assessment in case folks would like some additional information about that. Okay. Oops, and I want to make sure that we don't have anybody in the waiting room too. All right. So let me move this away from the screen. All right. Can everyone see my screen again? It should be pink and orange. So I make sure everyone can see the screen. Give me a thumbs up if you see a pink and green. Okay, awesome. Sorry, pink and orange screen. Thank you. All right. So next we have your advanced level and foundational workshops. As I mentioned, working with us through the cohort, these occur from 9:30 to 12 Central for 6 weeks, starting in mid-January. And I will chat in a link to those workshops here, as well as the entire process, so that you all have access to that as well. Okay. So there will be descriptions there. And again, I want to stress that each of these workshops build upon one another. And so individuals will need to participate in them consistently before they can go to the next session. Now for the exciting part, right? Your DI strategy, AKA your roadmap, right? Essentially, how do we implement this? Trainings are great, right? They help set the foundation, they help to do some seed planting, but without any support of how to implement them, it can be very frustrating and it can feel very much so like it's simply lip service. So here's what this looks like in practice. You want to make sure that your organization has an internal working plan that anyone who joins your organization can open up and see exactly what are we committing to within this 12-month period, who's responsible for what, where are we with the plan, and what are the various SMART activities that we are and action steps that we're taking to accomplish that. Right. So again, without this clear laid out internal plan, it can be very challenging to accomplish those goals. Now, the value of having both an internal work plan and an external work plan, which I'll talk about in a moment, is that as life happens, you have a plan that you can adjust as you need to, right? Let's say somebody leaves your organization. Let's say you get an influx of funding. Let's say you lose funding, right? This allows for your organization to pivot without having to throw away an entire plan. I can tell you that when the pandemic first occurred, we had a lot of work plans that we had to reiterate because we had plans to do community engagement projects that could no longer happen the way we initially envisioned. Again, having a plan is a lot easier to adjust for rather than having no plan at all and simply ideas, right? Goals without a plan are simply wishes, right? And we don't want to just be wishing, we want to be doing. So what this means, though, is for your external facing roadmap, you have your commitments to the organization, to your community. You've highlighted who's on the team of driving this work forward, and you're also sharing that responsibility. I recommend that organizations have a clear outline of who will be on their particular work group, as I like to call it, driving this work forward. What is that time commitment? How will those individuals be recognized and compensated for taking on a role that is in addition to their current job descriptions? And as a plug, I also recommend that organizations incorporate this work around JEDI into their position descriptions so that it normalizes and operationalizes the expectation that it is everyone's responsibility to promote culture, to promote equity in how we make decisions and how we show up in the workplace. So that we can adjust and move away from the assumption that it will be our HR department or our diversity officer or whoever's personally impacted or passionate about this, right? We want to build up that collective ability to drive this work forward because it is everyone's responsibility. The benefit of also having an external facing roadmap is that you can compare these results year to year. You can share your wins, you can share your pauses, you can share some of the failures as well. We want to create an environment where it is safe to fail. Failure doesn't mean we give up. It just means we find one way that didn't work and we move forward and try a different way. This also helps to build trust within your organization, between the community and within those who are working within your organization. So I mentioned those affinity spaces earlier. Now, With our organization, we offer facilitator guides and trainings on how to run affinity spaces through the cohort. Some organizations may have the diversity to give and feel ready to lead their own ERG or affinity space. Others might not. So joining within the cohort is a great opportunity to practice being a part of an affinity space if you are not there yet. One of the things I want to share that we noted in the past was that, I want to highlight this as an example of why affinity spaces can be so valuable. We had a group who self-identified as a non-Christian cultural heritage group, meaning that its members were folks who identified as Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, etc., or non-denominational. And what some of the members of that particular group recognized by being in this affinity space was that they were actually attempting to distance themselves from whiteness. And they recognized that that actually wasn't as conducive as they thought to their own personal growth and to actually driving change in their organizations. And so they decided to disband and instead join groups that were actually more likely to help promote their learning and challenge their own growth. And they could also bring their own knowledge to that work as well and drive that work forward with those who might be a little bit further behind in where they are along their journey, rather than leaving that work up to other marginalized people. So again, this is an example of the self-awareness and the actual action steps that can occur when we create the environment to work in work in community with other folks of a similar affinity, so that then we're better positioned to come together inter-identity wise, right, in coalition with that identity and work to promote some common goals. I think I mentioned your reflection sessions are intended to be a private space for your organizations to unpack what you learn in the workshops. I often recommend, even if you are hosting your own internal workshops, create space for dialogue after. Some folks are sparklers and they are ready to share right there in the workshop their opinions, their thoughts, their questions. Some folks are mullers and they need a little bit more time to process what they've learned, to consider what's been presented to them and to formulate their thoughts. We want to be mindful that not everyone has the ability to approach this work in an identical fashion. So one thing I recommend as well is creating spaces where folks of varying affinities can join. So for us, this means we have a persons of the global majority affinity space. So that includes people of color, the BIPOC community. We have the LGBTQIA affinity space, persons with disabilities, and a white caucus group right now. All of those affinity spaces within the C4 cohort are sovereignly led by members of various organizations, and they take turns rotating the facilitatorship of those groups. And most of them meet monthly, but they are also intended to meet in perpetuity, so even beyond our time together within either the spring or the fall cohort. Members are also welcome to start their own affinity space if those don't meet their identity needs. I mentioned the biweekly brain trust call as well. So how we embody this work is creating a space where individuals from various organizations can bring a thing forward, right? Maybe they're tackling how to navigate being canceled. Maybe they're navigating how to address a supervisor who is committing microaggressions. Maybe they are navigating how there's a struggle with how to communicate the progress that they're making in their organization without appearing performative. Or maybe they're worried about being performative, or they notice that that's occurring, but they don't know how to address it. The biweekly brain trust calls are a space for you to bring that work forward. If you don't already have a space like this in your organizations, I recommend having one. One of the ways that we approach this work is by having both an option to bring concerns live on the call, as well as to submit a concern anonymously via email. So again, create space in your organizations, regardless of whether you work with C4 or not, create space in your organizations for folks to offer up constructive dissent, for there to be dialogue around where folks are struggling as it relates to this work. At the end of our time together, we schedule a 2-month post-program check-in to see how you're doing with your plan. Did it break anywhere? Um, uh, does it need reevaluating? Do you need to pivot anywhere? Is it working well? Why is it working well? So for those of you who are on your own journey, checking in with your organization on, hey, how are we doing here? Honestly, what's working? What's not working? How could this be better? Oftentimes we have all the answers, but to the wrong questions. And so we want to change how we are asking questions and how we are accepting and requesting constructive dissent. So, with that, friends, I just want to highlight again that diversity is a result of us embodying inclusive and equitable practices, right? It's not a if we build it, sorry, it's not a well, we'll build it when they come. You have to build it for folks to come, right? So I'd love to take some questions now, especially from folks who had shared that they felt like their organization was struggling with something a little different. If you've got a thing, we're going to practice doing a bit of a brainstorming today to see if I can support you with your unique concerns within your organization. But before I stop sharing my screen, I just want to remind you that if this process sounds like something that could be helpful to your organization, take a look at that project package that I chatted in earlier. It's also on our website to get more information. We only accept organizations by application. So in order to give us time to review your organization and make sure that your org is going to be a good fit for the cohort, we ask that folks submit their applications by December 1st. Okay. And with that said, I'd love to open up the floor to any questions or concerns from folks on the call. And you're welcome to unmute or chat it in. Oops. I didn't realize I was still sharing the poll. And while we're waiting for folks, I'm going to launch one last poll. Oh, Marion, please go right ahead.
Yes, I'm so excited about the opportunity here, and my question is, it's very clear that it is a commitment, and it's a commitment of the organization as a whole and the individuals there. What would you say would be, or how could you summarize for us, just just summarize what is involved, just like in a short amount of time? So it's the weekly trainings, and then what? Yeah, if you could do
Yeah,
that, that'd be great.
absolutely. Yeah, so again, there's 3 phases. So we start first by onboarding your organization's leadership and helping you identify
Okay.
a work group. So you may already have we'll call it a diversity committee. You may not. We want to make sure that the folks on your work group who will be helping to customize some of the questions on your assessment. So for example, as a reminder, we have a set group of questions that go into your culture assessment that are standard.
Right.
And then each organization will be encouraged to identify up to 4 either two open-ended and 2 Likert scale questions that are specific to their organization to expand on their understanding, right? That maybe will not be captured in the general assessment. So those folks, the leadership and the work group members, need to be onboarded first. So those are 2 extra meetings. And then all of your staff, right? So up to 100 people will participate in the weekly JEDI workshop series that takes place on Tuesdays from 9:30 to 12 Central. Live preferably, but they can also be recorded. Now, one of the things I work really hard to ensure that is a commitment from the organizations is that everyone in your organization must at least participate live or watch the recordings, and we track that. Because what we have found is that if only a small group of folks who are personally invested get this education, get this shared language, it's going to be really hard when it comes time to implement. It's typically folks who did not participate in workshops that that offer the most pushback because they didn't get that foundational language and understanding. And this has nothing to do with anyone's character or intelligence. So we need organizations who are going to make that a priority. For organizations that can't commit their staff to those 6 weeks of learning, starting in mid-January, going until February, or in the fall when we have those dates, the fall program typically starts in mid-August and goes until early November. Then we discuss whether or not a private a private package is more ideal for them. So everyone in the organization participates in the culture assessment. The results of that get shared out to the work group and the leadership. If staff would like for me to present the results, I can support you in doing that, but we really want to make sure that as much as possible, communication around this work is coming directly from your executive leadership. So now, once those 6 weeks of education are complete, the work group members stay on and continue meeting on those Tuesdays, drafting out their organizational work plan. Once that organizational work plan has been vetted by the organization, they've identified up to 3 factors that they want to focus on over the next 12 months, as well as up to 5 corresponding SMARTY, as I like to call it, action steps. So SMART being specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, timely, inclusive, and equitable. And that is vetted by members of your organization. That's when it's vetted by your organization, that's also an opportunity to invite folks to serve on a sub working group throughout the next 12 months as you work through the process. And then at the end of our graduation or our commencement, each of the cohort organizations share their roadmap live on our call. And again, so this whole process is meant to be collaborative while also focusing specifically on where your unique organization is along the spectrum and where you want to go. And we also help.
So much.
Yeah, absolutely. And we
really
also
good.
help organizations, again, with group agreements for the work group members, position descriptions, so that there's clarity on like, hey, what am I volunteering for? How much time is this going to be? And then what do we do when that time is over? How do we onboard the next group of work group members to help drive the work plan forward? So again, we want to have a plan around this. Thank you so much for that question. I'm going to share the results from our poll. Okay, I'm going to take a moment to read the chat. If anyone else has any other questions or clarity that they need, please do. Let's see here. I'll stop sharing that. Okay, so we've got on the other side of an org doing a collective deep dive into JEDI work, how do orgs successfully onboard new employees and get them to the same point as the employees that went through the training? So for our organizations, they will either choose to participate in the retainer program, where if they hire a lot of people, for example, to onboard them into the process, right? So for example, for organizations where they're bringing on, 5 to 10 new people every year, it makes sense for them to be a part of the retainer program. With that, we do your exit interviews, your onboarding assessments, and then your staff members will have access to the workshops again in spring and fall, as well as the recordings. And they will also, you will also have access to support in driving your work plan forward, as well as annual reassessments. And I'm happy to send out information about that program as well. It's not going to be a good fit for every single organization, especially for really smaller organizations that don't have a lot of turnover, but some may want to incorporate the retainer program, especially if they want more support in driving their roadmap forward. Someone had a hand. Oh, Lisa, go right ahead. I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, August. I guess the question, it sort of builds on what you were just talking about. In laying the groundwork, our organization is sort of a federated model in terms of very small staff at a central national location, and then chapters all over the country that are volunteer based. And while the national organization is very much, yes, we need this, we don't necessarily have a lot of buy-in from the chapters, and wondering how to communicate, or if you have ideas on how to communicate to kind of lay the groundwork, because I think we wouldn't benefit as much if we didn't have that participation across all of the organization. And I'm not sure they're ready.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think we hear a lot of, well, that's not our mission. Why would we spend time on this, especially when it's volunteer hours that you're asking them to invest in this work?
Yeah. So, can you tell me what industry is your organization in?
Education and conservation. So educating on why conservation is important is our primary mission.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the key responses I give to this notion of this is not connected to our mission is your mission connected to people? Because if your mission is connected to people, then this is relevant, right? So for example, I often will say that your organization is probably not a sexual assault prevention agency, but I'm willing to bet most of your organizations require their staff to complete some form of anti-harassment training. Why is that? Because it helps to create a culture and a shared understanding of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable so that you can promote safety in the organization. I also say that, hey, if you're doing any kind of work site work outdoors, you're probably also not an EMT organization, but I'm pretty sure you require anyone who's going to be working with people outside and doing field work. I'm pretty sure you require them to have CPR and first aid training. Why is that? Because that's a critical piece of information that is needed for your organization to be safe and to protect your organizational members and your volunteers. The same thing goes for promoting workforce culture and inclusion. We are not getting this information in our formal education, and it's showing up in our organizations. It's costing us money. So, for example, every time you have a staff person that leaves your organization unexpectedly, you not only are losing out on the time that each staff member took to draft that position description, promote it on various websites and networking opportunities, interviewing them, onboarding them. You're also losing out on the money that you were paying them when they decided they were going to leave, but yet stayed until they found something better. Right? This can literally result in tens of thousands of dollars per employee that is out the door that you will never get back. And so helping folks understand that, number one, our demographics are changing. If we are only focused, if we're not concerned that our organization is homogenous and only representative of one particular identity group, be it socioeconomically, be it racially, be it gender-wise, be it neurodiversity or lack thereof, we are only facilitating and connecting with one particular group, which means that as our demographics change, we become obsolete, right? For example, in an environmental organization, why would young people care about protecting public land when no one's engaged them in this work, when they don't see the value in it, they don't love it because they've been told that that's not for them. So it's one, helping folks understand the price, the pain point that is at stake if we don't do anything differently. So one of the key questions I ask members who interview to become part of the cohort is, what will happen if you don't do anything differently? Because I need your organizations to own up, no matter how ugly the truth is that there's going to be a price to pay if you don't evolve, right? And so whether that's, you know what, we're not going to get any funding because our entire board is white. I'll say it, right? Because our funders are calling us to, to step it up. Or, we are in so much lockstep. We get along really well, but our organization is basically full of clones of one another. And so we're lacking innovation. What does that mean? We're literally going to become a dinosaur. So helping folks understand that this is not about simply being a social justice advocate or warrior. This is literally about creating better workplace practices rather than using the lazy logic of, well, yeah, our organization is homogenous because we're the only ones that care, right? That is extremely problematic. We want folks to understand that very mindset, that kind of thinking is exactly what's keeping us stuck. And for those of you who had the question about if you have a smaller organization, like maybe you've got 7 or 10 people, we do have scholarship options. We do pick one organization per cohort, by the way, so you can apply for that at any time. Simply send me an email, which you can do on our website, and we can send you information about the scholarship cohort. Any other questions, friends? Now's your time to ask. If you've got a thing that you're like, I'm struggling with this right now, here's your opportunity. So assessing culture and then steps to change. Yeah. And this is why we created this program in this way. I oftentimes try to push organizations to avoid just the one-off workshops. And even if they're going to do a one-off workshop, which we do during certain periods of time or depending on the client, it has to be coupled with key action steps of how they're going to implement that learning. Well, all right, friends. If there are no other further questions, I will bring us into a close. Oh, Lisa, go right ahead. I see your hand up.
Sorry, yes. The data collection on the metrics, so how people identify with their various groups, how you collect that data. Do you have recommendations as to where, when, how
Yeah.
do
So with
that?
Yep, absolutely. So with our culture assessment, everyone fills out the same assessment. And we start off by asking them a set of questions that get at each of those factors that I brought up on the screen earlier. And at the end of the survey, they have the option to self-identify. Now, if you'll recall, we had one example where we were showing how we protect identity. Some folks may decide that they don't want to self-identify. Part of the onboarding into this program is helping your staff members and your volunteers, your board, whoever's going to be participating in the assessment, helping them understand that if they don't self-identify, it's very challenging for us to be able to do anything with their responses. So, for example, it's not uncommon that the individuals who did not disclose identity are scoring lower overall. And a lot of times there's not a whole lot we can do about it other than recognize that, hey, okay, we've got this percentage of staff members who are really disgruntled in this particular area. The other component around this is that some staff may feel safe to identify parts of their identity, but not others, right? They might feel safe noting their gender, their whether or not they have a disability, and maybe their income, but not their race or their sexual orientation, etc. Right? So the more we can do in onboarding your team members and asking for them to bring forward any concerns around protecting anonymity, the better, which is why I like to show folks, here's what I see on my back end, right? Like even if your organizational leader says, I want to know what Jill Smith had to say about this, there's no way for me to give them that information. Again, the goal here is to help us see where identity might be determining or impacting how folks are experiencing the organization. I don't know of any other platform that specifically does this. Again, we use the platform Culture Amp, which again protects the identity of your staff members. So everyone gets a link, they get the same code to log into, and then they fill that out. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, because that's how long we keep the assessment open, my team and I create a summary of that assessment for you, as well as your raw data. So you will get a copy of all of the comments. You will get a copy of the summary of key themes that came up in the comments, as well as each factor. So for example, if you wanted to know, well, how are women with a master's degree who are also single parents who work in our DC office feeling about their sense of voice and opportunities, we can pull that data and we can compare it to another set of demographics as well. And that is the key: intersectionality and an intersectional analysis of your organizational culture. Okay, I have another question. Does Cream City Conservation have experience working with non-enviro organizations? Our org has a larger international humanitarian org with many areas of focus, the environment being one of them. I feel like the court option would still be a fit for us. Absolutely. We have worked, again, so we say environmental and or community-based. So that is fairly broad. The process is the same. We've worked with symphonies. We have worked with tech companies. We have worked with solar installers. We've worked with nonprofits. We've worked with government agencies, other certified B Corps, and for-profit entities. We will file. We'll get more clarity around this when we do your interview. But that is, I just wanted to clarify. Now, we are not going to be a good fit for everybody, right? Our workshop specifically, while we do lead with a focus around public health, around environmentalism, it is still applicable across the board because we use examples from various industries. We even use examples from the New York Symphony on what some of the practices they've used to promote equity and inclusion in their organization. Again, most of the United States workforce is built on white middle class norms. And so none of us are absolved from these practices, right? It doesn't make us bad. It just means that if we're going to evolve into how our current workforce demographics are set up, we have to do things differently. And the truth is, the world of work has not evolved since the 50s. Our structures, our practices have not. And so we have to start doing better. We have to be that change. All right, friends. I'll take one more question or comment even. All right, everyone. Well, thank you again so much for your time. I wish you the best this week. Again, if this sounds like something that could support your organization, please do get in touch with me. I'm going to put my screen back up for a moment here so that you can see my email address and my contact information. It is a pleasure. Hope to work with you all soon. Hope to support you and keep moving forward. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.